Well, hello again. I've got another study in the parables and hard sayings of Jesus. I'm Maurice and thank you for tuning in. The parable books are available from Amazon as a paperback or Kindle download, and if you go to the Barrett Ministries Facebook page, there's a link to our new shop at Shopify, and you can order them from there. There's 4 volumes at the moment. These are studies that are not in the 4 volume. I'll need to write another book. But this study is called Sabbath was made for man. Jesus made a statement. He said man wasn't made for the Sabbath was made for man. What did he mean? So let's read the scripture that it's taken from. It's from Mark chapter 2 verse 23. So we'll read the whole context and then we'll understand why he said it. And it came to pass that he, that's Jesus, went through the cornfields on the Sabbath day. And his disciples began as they went to pluck the ears of corn. And the Pharisees said unto him, Behold, why do they on the Sabbath day that which is not lawful? They said it was work. They were getting the ears of corn and rubbing them together to eat them. And he said unto them, Have ye never read what David did when he had need and was a-hungered, and he that were with him? How he went to the house of God in the days of Abiathar, the high priest, and did eat the showbread which is not lawful to eat, but for the priests, and gave them also to them that were with him. If you don't know the story, David was hungry, and he went into the temple, into the house of God, and he said, Have you any food? And the priest said, We haven't got any food, only the showbread, which is holy. It's been dedicated to God, so you can't have that. And David said, Give it me. And David took the holy thing, and not only did he eat it, he gave it to all his men. And it wasn't lawful to eat. The Bible clearly shows that. So instead of Jesus accepting it, what the challenge, why do they do that which is not lawful? He didn't answer it. He says, well, David didn't do that was lawful. That's not a justification, is it? Why did you tell a lie? Well, he told a lie. Why does Jesus talk about David? He said, why do your disciples break the law? And he said, well, David broke the law, but what's that got to do with his disciples? It's amazing how Jesus was not playing with them, but getting them to question. Verse 27, and he said unto them, The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Therefore the Son of Man, not the Son of God, man, Son of mankind, is Lord also of the Sabbath. The Sabbath isn't Lord over us. It's not ruling us. We're over the Sabbath. The Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. And he entered again unto a synagogue, and there was a man which had a withered hand. And they watched him whether he'd heal him on the Sabbath day, that they might accuse him. Because that was Jesus' work, wasn't it? It was clearly work. It was Jesus' work. He said, I must work the works of him that sent me. What was his work? To heal the sick, raise the dead, cast out devils. So it was work, Jesus' work. And he did it on the Sabbath. And he said unto the man which had the withered hand, Stand forth, come out. So he called him to the front. He's not healed him yet. He says, Come forth. So the man had a withered hand. And he said unto them, the Pharisees, Is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath day or to do evil? To save life or to kill? And they held their peace. They had no answer to that. And when he looked around about them with anger, being grieved for the hardness of the heart. It's funny, he was angry, but he was grieved for the hardness of his heart, of the heart. It's all right to be angry if you're grieving for the hardness of people's hearts. If you get angry and think, why can't they believe it? Why can't they see it? That's you getting angry. But if you're grieved inside because of the hardness of the hearts, that's different. And he said to the man, Stretch forth your hand, and he stretched his hand out, and his hand was restored whole as the other. That's amazing, isn't it? And the Pharisees went forth and straightway took counsel with the Herodians against him, how they may destroy him. Jesus said, Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and of Herod. So they also had the leaven, the Herodians, they were with Herod. So Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath, verse 27. That's what we're looking at. Well, Jesus is laying a principle down, isn't he? That's a principle. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Therefore, because of that, man is also Lord of the Sabbath. So he's laying down a principle. Why? Why is he laying this principle down? What caused him to state it at this time? Well, I've read the story. The disciples were eating ears of corn on the Sabbath day. And the Pharisees said, why is it not lawful? Why are they doing things which are not lawful? So we need to look at the law. Did the law say you couldn't eat on the Sabbath day? Surely it's not work, picking ears of corn and eating them. If you pick an apple off a tree and eat it, is it work? If you're taking 20 apples off a tree to go and market them and sell them, that's work. But if you take an apple off a tree to eat, that's surely not work. It doesn't say don't eat on the Sabbath day. It said do no work. So they weren't breaking the law, were they? This was the Pharisees. You see, they strain at a gnat and swallow a camel. Where in the law does it say you can't walk more than a Sabbath day's mile? That was what the Pharisees said. You see, when they went to Babylon, they had the Babylonian Talmud, and they made all these rules about what was work and what wasn't, and it became ridiculous. And Jesus was exposing. Let's look about the law and the Sabbath. What does it say? So Exodus 20, verse 10. But the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord. Sabbath of the Lord, not Sabbath of man, Sabbath of the Lord. It's God's Sabbath. Didn't God rest on the seventh? God instituted the Sabbath. It wasn't in the law of Moses. It wasn't instituted in the law of Moses. It's God's Sabbath. But the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God, and in it thou shalt do no work, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, nor thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor thy stranger which is in thy gates. It's a day of rest, not of work. Exodus 35, verse 3. You shall kindle no fire throughout your habitations upon the Sabbath day. It didn't say you can't eat. It says don't do any work, don't go out to the woods and get the sticks and rub them together. They had no matches, did they? They'd rub the sticks together. Don't kindle a fire on the Sabbath day. Jeremiah 17, verse 21. Thus saith the Lord, take heed to yourself and bear no burden on the Sabbath day. That's work, carrying a burden. Nor bring it into the gates of Jerusalem. Don't trade, in other words, don't carry a bale of hay outside and sell it. So it's not saying you can't carry your child, is it? That's not a burden. It's talking about work. Don't carry, because it was manual labour, so you carried a corn on your head, didn't you? Or in the Bible, they carried the water pots on the head and bales of hay on the head. So don't do that. Jeremiah 17, verse 22. Neither carry forth a burden out of your house on the Sabbath day, neither do any work, but hallow ye the Sabbath day. In other words, hallow means be separated. Holiness just means separated. So separate the day. It's got to be different than any other day, as I commanded your fathers. So the Sabbath was a rest day. It wasn't a holy day. Of course it was a holy day because it was separate. It was separate from the other 6 days. But it wasn't a religious day. That's the point I want to make. There was no instruction in the law to read the Bible on the Sabbath day, to go to the temple. There was no instruction to pray on the Sabbath day. There was no instruction to read the law on the Sabbath day. There was no instruction to go to the temple, study. It wasn't a religious day. It was just separated so you could rest from all your labours, as God rested from his. God didn't do anything on the Sabbath except rest. It said God worked 6 days and he rested on the Sabbath. And what did he do on the Sabbath? He looked at his creation and said, it's good. It's very good. You've got time to assess your week's work. Did I work well this week? Was I lazy? Was it profitable? You've got a time to relax and rest. It's not a religious day to seek God. We've turned it into a religious day, and you have to go to church and you have to pray and you can't eat sweets on the Sabbath. We've made it ridiculous, just like the Pharisees did. It's just to rest from your labours. It's made for you. It's not to lock you into some religious duty. Oh, you've kept the Sabbath, you've not kept the Sabbath. It's for us to rest. It's a day of relaxation to be with your family. Because in those days, a man went to work and he'd work in the field. He wouldn't see his wife and his family. He'd come home late in the day, 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock, getting in the harvest. His children would be in bed. It was a day to relax with his family, not to do religious things, to rest from your labours, as God rested from his. So it's no different today, is it? People think that Sunday is a religious day. That's the Catholic day, Sunday, actually. The Sabbath never changed. It's a Catholic day. I've got quotes from cardinals who mock us and say, you say that, you're Protestants and we're the whore of Babylon, yet you observe the Sunday. You worship God on the Sunday. You shouldn't. What day is the Sabbath day? This is the catechism. What day is the Sabbath day? It's a 7th day. What day is that? It's a Saturday. He said, the cardinal said, you worship God on the day that the Pope declared was the day that we should worship, because they worship the sun. It's Babylon on the Sunday. He said, and you all worship God on the Sunday and you don't keep the Sabbath. Christians should keep the Sabbath. Catholics should keep the Sunday. That's what the Catholic Church said. That's why they want to force Sunday worship, and it's coming in again. I think in Germany and Croatia, they've passed a law, no work on the Sunday, because the Catholic Church is taking over again, isn't it? The one world religion, and it will be forced to Sunday worship. You'll see. I don't have to prophesy it, though. They're passing the laws already. Well, Jesus answered with a question. Haven't you read what David did? He said, David broke the law. He doesn't say that. He doesn't say, well, have you read what David did? He broke the law on the Sabbath. He didn't say David broke the law. Jesus didn't break the law on the Sabbath, although he worked. David didn't break the law, eating the showbread, although the law says you can't do it. But he didn't break it. Mark 2:25-26. And he said unto them, have you never read what David did? He's not saying he broke the law. Well, the story is in 1 Samuel 21. Let's read it. Because it appears that David definitely broke the law. Then came David to Nob. That's a town, to Ahimelech, the priest. And Ahimelech was afraid at the meeting of David, and said unto him, why are you come alone, and no man with thee? And David said unto Ahimelech the priest, the king hath commanded me a business, and has said to me, let no man know anything of the business where I send thee, and what I've commanded thee. And I have appointed my servants to such and such a place. That was a lie. David told a lie. Now therefore, what is under thine hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread in thine hand, or what is there present? And the priest answered and said to David, there is no common bread. There's no bread I'm allowed to give you under mine hand, but that is hallowed bread. It's separated bread. If any of the young men have kept themselves at least from women. And David answered to the priest and said unto him, of a truth women have been kept to us from these 3 days. We've not slept with women, we're not defiled. I came out yesterday of the young men, the holy, and the bread is in a manner common, though it was sanctified this day in the vessel. So the priest gave him the hallowed bread, For there was no bread there but the showbread that was taken from before the Lord to put hot bread in the day it was taken out. And somebody saw him and they told Saul. So David apparently broke the law, but he didn't. Is it right to do good on the Sabbath day or to do evil? If David was doing what was right, he wasn't breaking the Sabbath, was he? It's not to do with the legalism. It's the spirit of the law, not the dead letter. I'll give you an illustration. The 30-mile speed limit, what's it for? It's to save lives, isn't it? Where there's young people, old people and children crossing, going to school, they make the 30-mile speed limit so you don't kill anyone. So it's a good law. And we should obey it. Obey the laws of the land. But the law, the spirit of the law, was to save life. It wasn't to restrict you to 30 mile an hour. The government don't want to restrict you to 30 mile an hour. The aim was to save lives. That's the spirit of the law. But they make it a dead letter. Thou shalt not go above 30 miles an hour. We understand that. So if I go above 30 miles an hour, I broke the law and I deserve to be punished. What happens if my little girl is suddenly dying? She's had an accident, she goes and she cuts her arm off and it's hanging off. And I say, I've got to get to the hospital or she'll die. So I jump in my car, there's nobody about, and so I drive at 50 mile an hour to get to the hospital. I've broke the law. Have I? No, I've kept the law, because the law is to save life. I've broke the law to save my daughter's life, so I've kept the spirit of it. Do you understand? Now, when I go to court, because I went through a radar, the judge will say, Mr. Barrett, you broke the law. And I'll say, yes, Your Honour, but I kept the spirit of the law because the law is to save lives, and I went at 50 to save my daughter's life. And the judge may say, OK, I'll let you off. He probably won't, and he'll say, I understand, and I've done the same myself. If the judge is honest, he'd do the same if his daughter was dead. But I have to fine you because you broke the dead letter. Can you see how the law is an ass? Because it's the dead letter. There's no spirit in it. There's no compassion in the law. You broke the law, therefore you're fined. There's no compassion. There should be, shouldn't there? But it's very difficult because people take advantage and they'll tell a lie and say, oh, well, I was taking my daughter to the doctor, or I was ill and I was desperate for the loo and I didn't want to go to the toilet in my car, so I was speeding. You know, people will tell lies to try and get around the judge. But nevertheless, I've kept the spirit of the law. So Jesus doing good, doing his work on the Sabbath day, was keeping the spirit of the law. Is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath day or evil? And David was keeping his men alive. So is it lawful to starve to death on the... Would God want you to starve to death because you couldn't eat the showbread? God's bigger than that. He'd say, eat it. I know it's lawful, but you're going to die, so eat it. I've got a friend, well, he's died now, he died a couple of years ago, but he lived in Cheetham Hill in Manchester where all the Jews are. And he told me a story, I found it hard to believe, but it's true because he was working with them. And he married a Jew, he married a Jewess, so he knew well. And this man had a sick daughter. She was very sick, but she was under medication, it was all right. But this Sabbath day, this Saturday, she suddenly, I don't know what it was, but she was dying. And he wouldn't get in the car and take her to hospital. So he was trying to find a Gentile, because you can get a Gentile to do the work. You can't work as a Jew, but you can get a Gentile to gather your stick. So he was looking round, he went out the house desperate to try and find a Gentile to take his daughter to hospital, and he couldn't find anyone. And she died. So he kept the law, but he broke it, because the spirit of the law is to save life. And because he wouldn't take his daughter to the doctor, his law was more important than his daughter's life. He loved the dead letter more than his daughter. And she died because he wouldn't take her to hospital, because he was a Jew and I can't work. That's work. That's ridiculous, isn't it? Can you see how the law, unless you get the spirit of it, and the spirit of the Sabbath, it's for us to give us a rest. It's not to lock us into something where you can't work and you can't do this and you can't go for a walk or you can't eat a sweet. It doesn't say you can't eat on a Sabbath. It's ridiculous how Israel and how the church treat it. When I grew up, you couldn't eat sweets on Sunday, you couldn't read a newspaper, you couldn't. It's legalism, isn't it? It's for you to relax. It's not a religious day. You rest from your labours. Watch the football, do what you want, take your children in the park, enjoy it. Jesus gives another illustration in John 7. Because the priests officiated on the Sabbath, didn't they? They took the sacrifices on the Sabbath, so they were working. John 7, 22, 24. He said, Moses therefore gave you circumcision, not because it's of Moses, but it's of the fathers. And ye on the Sabbath day circumcise a man. See, the law says you've got to circumcise a child on the 8th day. So if the 8th day comes on the Sabbath, you've got to circumcise him, because it says, and so you're doing work, you're circumcising, that's work. And it catches them out. It's saying you mess what the law's about. It's not about locking you into some legal system. If a man on the Sabbath day receives circumcision, that the law of Moses should not be broken, so you circumcise him on the Sabbath day to keep that law, but you break the Sabbath. Are you angry at me because I made a man whole on the Sabbath day? Why are you getting angry at me? You circumcise a man on the Sabbath day to keep the law of Moses. I've healed a man on the Sabbath day. Why are you angry at me? Can you see that Sabbath's made for us? And then he says this, judge not according to appearance. Oh, he's broke the Sabbath, he's done this, he's done that. But judge righteous judgment. You need the spirit of the law when you judge, not the dead letter. It's so easy, isn't it, to be legalistic? So it's a law of creation. Let me give you some scriptures that talk about the Sabbath. It's God's chosen Sabbath. It's not ours. We're keeping God's Sabbath. Let me read you some scriptures because it's a law of creation. Nothing to do with the Ten Commandments and Moses. The Sabbath was instituted before the law of Moses. So it's not to do with the Talmud, is it? The Talmud, the Torah, because it was instituted before the law of Moses. So this is what Paul says in Colossians. And we've talked about this in the previous studies about the ordinance of the law were nailed to the tree. And you being dead in your sins and the uncircumcision of your flesh, hath he quickened together with him, having forgiven you all your trespasses. So we're uncircumcised, we're Gentiles, but he's redeemed us. Blotting out the handwriting of ordinances that was against us, which was contrary to us, and took it out of the way, nailing it to the cross. So all the ordinance, all the rules of the law, not the moral law, but the ordinances, and the Sabbath's nothing to do with morals, is it? The feasts are nothing to do with morals. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not covet, honour your father and mother. That's all morals. So of course that stands. That'll not one jot or tittle fail from that till everything's fulfilled. That the moral law of God stands. But the ordinances, the Sabbath days, the feasts, the washing of pots and pans, etc., blotting out the handwriting of ordinance that was against us, which were contrary to us, and took it out of the way, nailing it to the cross. And having spoiled principalities and powers, he made a show of them openly, triumphing over them in it. That's an interesting verse to put in between, isn't it? Triumphing over having spoiled principalities and powers, because they're the ones that trick us to be legalistic. Why would he put it in when he's talking of the law? Having spoiled them, because they're the ones who have the dead letter of the law, make us legalistic and religious. He's made an open show of them, triumphing over them, and he goes back, so it's in context. Let therefore no man judge you in meat or in drink. So that's pork and lamb, isn't it? Or in drink, or in respect of a holy day, or a new moon, or of the Sabbath. He actually mentions it. He says, don't let anyone judge you. You're free from those ordinances. Nobody can judge you anymore. They're only a shadow of things to come. They were only prophecy. Do you know what the Sabbath is? It's a prophecy of the millennial kingdom. It's a prophecy of the millennium when the kingdom comes. That's all it is. It's just a shadow. Jesus worked 6 days, didn't he? And he rested on the 7th. God rested on the 7th. Well, that's a prophecy. Because Peter gives us the key. He says, one day with the Lord, one day with God is like 1,000 years. It wasn't a throwaway phrase. It wasn't saying one day is like 1,000,000 days to God, or one day is like an eternity. He says one day is like 1,000 years. It's a key. So God has worked on this earth for 6,000 years. If you look at the Jewish calendar, we're coming to the end of 6,000 years. It's 5,000. I don't know what number it is, but we're getting near to 6,000. So God's working on this earth 6,000 years. And then God is going to have his Sabbath. And he's going to rest for 1,000 years a day. Where Jesus will be God. Jesus will be called the Almighty, the Prince of Peace. Wonderful Counselor, the Mighty God, the Prince of Peace. Jesus will be the only God in the millennium because God won't be there. He's taking his Sabbath rest. And he's handing everything to Jesus, the Son. So the Sabbath is, and all the law, the ordinances, they're only types and shadows of things to come. But the body is Christ. It's all about Christ now. They're prophecies. So of course we need one day a week rest. Because God rested, he set in the principle. You weren't made to work 7 days a week. God made you to work 6 days and rest 1. We've made a 5-day week, haven't we? I don't work 5 days and have a weekend off. I work 6 days and rest 1. That's all you need. You need 1 clear day of rest a week. You don't need 2 days off or 3 days. You need 1, and you'll be healthier for 6 and 1, not 5 and 2. Because that's God's order. So if I keep God's order, I must be healthier. I must have a clearer mind because I'm doing what God said. So don't let anyone judge you. So let's look at these laws of creation. Exodus 31:13. Speak also unto the children of Israel, saying, verily, my Sabbaths you shall keep. Not keep the Sabbaths, my Sabbaths, the God's Sabbath. Keep my Sabbaths, for it is a sign between me and you. So the Sabbaths are a sign. Well, a sign isn't the reality. It's like the rainbow in the sky. It's a sign, a covenant. So the Sabbaths are a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that you may know that I am the Lord that does separate you. I've separated you. So nobody else keeps the Sabbath. All the pagans have other days or no days. But so they know that you're worshipping the God who created the earth in 6 days and rested the 7th. It's a sign to all the nations that you are following your God who worked 6 days and rested the 7th. So when you rest 1 day a week, you're showing that you're God's child because you're following God. You follow what your Father does. So you know that I'm the Lord that separated you. Leviticus 19 verse 3. Ye shall fear every man his mother and his father, and keep my Sabbaths. I am the Lord your God. Why does he say I am the Lord your God? Because that's how you know he's the Lord your God. You keep his commandments. Leviticus 19:30. Ye shall keep my Sabbaths. Notice my Sabbath. and reverence my sanctuary. I am the Lord. Leviticus 26:2. You shall keep my Sabbaths and reverence my sanctuary. I am the Lord. And Ezekiel 44 verse 24. And in controversy they shall stand in judgment, and they shall judge it according to my judgments, and they shall keep my laws and my statutes in all mine assemblies, and they shall separate my Sabbaths. So it wasn't instituted in the law of Moses, it was instituted at creation. And it's very interesting. All the commandments, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not forswear thyself. But with the Sabbath, it doesn't say, there's no commandment that says, thou shalt keep my Sabbaths in the law of Moses. Let's read what it says. Exodus 20 verse 8. He said, remember my Sabbath day and keep it holy. It was already separated at creation, so it wasn't instituted at the law of Moses. Moses didn't institute the Sabbath and say, keep it. God said, remember it. I've also hallowed it. I've already separated. That's how you should live. Because I separated it at creation. So remember it and keep it holy. It's already holy. So the law didn't institute the Sabbath. So when the law is finished, the ordinances, the Sabbath still stands, doesn't it? So people say, well, the law's done away with. Every day's a holy day now. Every day's a Sabbath. That's nonsense. If every day's a Sabbath, no day's a Sabbath. Because the holy means separated. So if every day's the same, I can worship God every day. Of course you do. But every day's the same. It's a separate day. Not to worship God, but to rest from your labours. So God said, remember the Sabbath day, keep it holy. And then the next verse says this. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the hosts of them. This is going back to Genesis. And on the seventh day, God ended his work which he'd made. So God ended his work. And God rested on the seventh day from all his work which he'd made. Why did God rest? Was he tired? The Lord doesn't slumber. He doesn't sleep. He doesn't need rest, does he? So why did God rest from his labours? He doesn't need. He's got endless energy. He doesn't need to rest. So there's a reason why God rested from all his labours. In other words, he ceased from his labours. He didn't work. Not because he was tired like us. And God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because that in it he had rested from all his work which God created. But he didn't rest because he was exhausted and said, wow, that creation was hard work. How was it hard work? He spoke and it happened. Is it hard work to speak and say, heaven and earth be created? He just spoke and it happened. He rested to assess his work, because it said on the seventh day he looked and he said it's very good. It's good to rest and assess your week. If you carry on working, you've no time to assess. And Christians often are rushing about, and pastors work 7 days a week. They've no time to sit down and assess the life and the work and the church, because they're too busy for God. Mark 3 and 4, verse 4. And Jesus said unto them, is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath days, or to do evil, to save life or kill it? But they held the peace. Is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath day or evil? We know now it's lawful to do good. And if you break the law to do good, you've not broke the law. You've kept the spirit of it. Remember the Good Samaritan? It doesn't say it was a Sabbath day, but the priest walked by on the other side. Why didn't the priest stop and help the man? Because he was religious. I've got to get to the temple. I need to have the sacrifices. I need to help. That's my job. So he kept the law and didn't miss the temple because they were on a cycle, weren't they? There were courses where they had to be there. So he kept the law, but he broke it because he didn't help the man on the it wasn't a Sabbath day, but it's the same principle. And what does it say in Mark 3 verse 6 after he'd said, is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath day or to do evil? Mark 3 verse 6. They sought to kill him. That's amazing. Because he challenged them. Have you got the scripture, Jay? And the Pharisees went forth and straightway took counsel with the Herodians against him, how they may destroy him, because he challenged them with the spirit of the law instead of the dead letter. And when you challenge people who've got the dead letter of the law, they get angry with you. That's always the end result of legalism. Legalism will always kill life. They'll deaden you, they'll kill you. That's always the end. They sought how they may destroy him. Well, it's always a fine line, isn't it, between legalism and the law of love, because the words are the same, but we've got to get the spirit of it. So Jesus brought the dead letter of the law and the traditions of the elders on purpose, but Jesus never once broke the spirit of the law. Why would Jesus break his Father's law? He kept the law, but can you see it's the spirit of the law that matters? Don't become a legalistic Christian. Well, it ought to be. I remember my dad once. He was disgusted. He was a minister of Assemblies of God, and he was they had a business meeting once a month, and he went to them. And they would do all the business from the ministers in the northwest of England, so all the ministers were there. And they had to discuss a minister had fallen into sin. He'd committed adultery with a member of the church. And so they had to deal with it. Obviously, they couldn't allow him to be minister. And they were looking at the Constitution. Well, what does the Constitution say? Well, we've got to do that. And I remember my dad telling me about it. He said they were so hard. You know, they weren't worried about the poor man who'd repented and said, I'm sorry, I've sinned, and you know, he'd repented. But the Constitution said they would crucify. And my dad stood up and said, brethren, what about compassion? Have we not got to have compassion on the man? We're not condoning the sin, and maybe he needs to be punished. But to read out the Constitution as though it's a dead letter, it's so easy when well, the Constitution says it. My considered opinion, brethren, is that we've got to stick to the Constitution. Well, blow the Constitution and let's have some compassion, not condone the sin. And the man may have to be excommunicated, but let's do it with tears in our eyes. You know, if you discipline somebody, if you excommunicate them from the church, you can only do it if you've got tears in your eyes, if it's the last thing you want to do. And you're grieving because you've got to separate this brother. It's not, well, you've got to go. We've got to keep the church holy. Can you see the difference? You're crying and saying, brother, we've got to do it. We don't want to do it, but we have to do it. And please, after a period, let's welcome you back. You're only on probation. We've got to do it because there's other young converts watching, and we can't condone the sin, and you've confessed the sin. But you've got to do it with a grieving heart. Not with the law says it. Can you see the difference? That's what Jesus was all about. Stopping the dead letter of the law and getting the spirit of it. So love will always fulfill the law. Love will always fulfill the law. You can't break the law if you love, because Paul said, don't kill, don't covet your neighbour's wife, don't commit adultery. He said, if you love your neighbour, you fulfill the law, because love fulfills the law. So you'll always fulfill it if your motive is compassion, even if you break the dead letter of the law. That's not an excuse to break it. But if the motive is love, it will always fulfill the law. Jesus loved the man, so he healed him on the Sabbath day. Jesus came to bring a relationship with God and to abolish religion. He hated Judaism. God hates Christianity as a religion. Of course we're Christians because we follow Christ, but the religion, God came to give us relationship. Religion has legality. It has rules and you have to obey them. And they'll burn you at the stake if you're a heretic, if you don't agree with them. But Jesus came to give us a relationship with God. Well, the traditions of men and the dead letter of the law will always persecute the spirit of the law. It's the difference between Ishmael and Isaac. I won't go into it, but if you read Galatians 4 and 5, it said, the flesh will persecute the spirit. It will always persecute the spirit. Ishmael was of the flesh, Isaac was of the spirit. And as it was then, he said, so it is now. The flesh, those who have the dead letter of the law are carnal. The carnal, when they keep the ordinances of God, the carnal have got the dead letter of the law. They think they're spiritual, but actually they're carnal. And they'll always persecute the spirit. It's an undying principle. So, I hope that helps you. I've finished the study. It's not a long one. So let's be free people. Let's be people who love and understand the spirit of the law, who love in the spirit, not the dead letter of the law, because love will always fulfill the law. Father, I pray that you'll help us. I pray that those watching this video will understand that I'm not into breaking the law. I'm not using the spirit as an excuse to disobey the law. The laws of the land and the spiritual laws. But Father, let us have mercy and compassion and keep the spirit of the law, because Sabbath was made for us, not us for the Sabbath. It's not to lock us into some religious duty once a week. It's to free us from our work to rest and enjoy you. What a difference, Father. I just pray that you'll give people insight and inspiration and revelation on this wonderful principle, Lord, that's freed me. I ask it in your name. Amen. God bless you. Have a wonderful week. See you for the next study. Interesting one. Blasphemy against the Holy Ghost can't be forgiven.